Quia novum papam habetis, aliquam libros legamus. Now, I was hoping that it would take more than 36 hours to elect a new pope, because that would mean that this list came out more or less on time. The election of a new pope and the cardinals going into conclave has meant that there is a lot of interest in how popes get elected. And the pope's election has meant that a lot of the discussion has brought up the Oscar-winning film Conclave, based on the novel by Robert Harris. Now, when it comes to papal elections, it isn't just Robert Harris's book Conclave. I could think of 4 off the top of my head fairly easily, and if I can think of 4, I can probably make a list of a lot more. These would be books to put on my TBR, because I probably wouldn't have enough time, and certainly didn't have enough time, to read them. But I have a list all the same. Now, I'll first mention a couple of books I'm not going to be putting on the list. One is Angels and Demons by Dan Brown, and the other is Pope Joan by Lawrence Durrell. When it comes to Angels and Demons, I would like to be able to say that it's because I don't think it's a particularly good book, but it has to be said that lots of people enjoyed this book, and they did make a rather sensationalist film about it. With Pope Joan, this is a retelling of a legend about a 9th or 10th century pope who turned out to be a woman and was torn apart by an angry Roman crowd. Now, because I haven't been able to look into this list of books in great detail, it may well be that some of the books on this list are less well written than Dan Brown's Angels and Demons, and are much more scurrilous and controversial than a book about a female pope. All but one of the books in this list are written by Roman Catholics, but even within Roman Catholicism there can be a certain amount of disagreement. Some of these books are written by people who are angry at the Roman Catholic Church as a whole, or maybe they feel that the Roman Catholic Church hasn't reformed enough, or maybe they are against the reforms that have already been made, especially the series of reforms made under the aegis of Pope John XXIII in the 1960s, which is known as Vatican II. The headline reform in Vatican II is the dropping of the Latin Mass. And some of the books deal with the idea that maybe the author would have made a pretty good pope themselves. I should probably mention my standpoint on religion. I'm not a Roman Catholic, and I'm not actually somebody who believes in God. But if your religion makes you a better person and gives you joy, then I'm all for you continuing to believe whatever you want to believe. So let's do a list of books that aren't just Conclave. We start with Conclave by Greg Tobin from 2001. This book follows an American cardinal called Sean Mulrain, who is thrust into the politics of the papal conclave and becomes something of a front runner. Greg Tobin has written a number of non-fiction books on Catholic themes, including biographies of John Paul II and Benedict XVI. As a Catholic layman, Greg Tobin has been brought in to commentate on the conclaves in 2005 and 2014, the elections of Benedict XIV and Pope Francis. From what I can tell about the reception of this book, it's generally thought to be a fairly accurate version of the politicking of the papal conclave and how popes get elected, but without the sensationalism of some other books. Our next book is Hadrian VII by Frederick Rolfe from 1904. Frederick Rolfe is a very, very strange character. He trains as a Roman Catholic priest, but left his seminary under something of a dark cloud. As a writer, he sometimes went by the name Baron Corvo, and Hadrian VII is kind of his major work. He was never really successful in his lifetime, and in fact, Frederick Rolfe died in poverty. But in the 1960s, a play based on Hadrian VII was made, and this renewed interest in Hadrian VII and made it something of a cult book. These days it's often in lists of the best books of the 20th century. I've seen Hadrian VII described as autobiographical wish fulfillment. This is how Frederick Rolfe would have been if he had been elected Pope. In Hadrian VII, George Arthur Rose, a former British Roman Catholic priest, is enticed to Rome by a bishop and a cardinal. There he is very quickly reinstated into the priesthood and rather surprisingly made Pope. The novel then goes into the short reign of Hadrian VII and all the changes that he tries to make to the Roman Catholic Church. The next book is The Keys of St. Peter by Rosa Peyrefitte. This is a very controversial book, a satirical look into all the background politicking and hypocrisies of the Roman Catholic Church, especially when it comes to electing a new pope. This was a French book that outraged Catholics at the time and was indeed entered into the Vatican's Index of Prohibited Books. The Vatican's Index of Prohibited Books, which was abandoned by the Vatican in 1966, does contain one or two rather interesting books. And under normal circumstances, the appearance of The Keys of St. Peter on this Index of Prohibited Books would make it an automatic must-read, if only for devilment. However, as with many books, there are major problems with the author. Rosa Peyrefitte was homosexual and wrote an awful lot on homosexual themes. This in itself ought not to be a problem. As far as I'm concerned, so long as your sexual desire is adult and consensual, then I have no problem with it, and I don't think anybody else should have a problem with it. However, Rosa Peyrefitte was a pederast. He was into boys, and that might make you pause and hesitate at reading this book or having anything to do with this book. But there are leading people who praise Rosa Peyrefitte for helping them accept their homosexuality, and that ought to be a good thing. But it's just the boys stuff that gets in the way of it, and maybe you might not want to read this book as a result. The next book is Shoes of the Fisherman by Maurice West from 1963. You may know this book because it was made into a film starring Anthony Quinn. It concerns a Ukrainian bishop, Kirill Lakota, who has spent many years in a Russian gulag and is released, heads to Rome, becomes a cardinal, and somewhat quickly becomes elected as Pope. It then looks into the way that he balances the different forces involved in the Cold War, especially an up-and-coming China. This book has a sequel in which we see the further adventures of Pope Kirill as he tries to navigate the world of politics and religion. The 1968 film of this book was rather successful and had something of a resurgence 10 years later when the Polish Cardinal Karol Wojtyła became John Paul II. The book, released in 1963, shows Pope Kirill as something of a reforming pope, which slightly prefigured the reforms made in Vatican II in the same year. Our next book is The Vicar of Christ by Walter F. Murphy from 1979. This novel is written in 3 parts and written as a journalistic investigation into the life of an American pope. The first part deals with experiences during war, in which he is decorated with the Congressional Medal of Honor. The next part deals with his experiences as a judge and his elevation to become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. After a family bereavement, he retires as Chief Justice and becomes a monk in a monastery, where he eventually becomes Pope. And that is what the third part of this book deals with. The author, Walter F. Murphy, was a devout Catholic and a decorated Marine Corps officer. He later worked in the Supreme Court of the United States, though not as justice. It looks like this book, which was something of an ethic, was trained for its attention to detail and its serious contemplation of both legal matters and the religious matters concerning the election of a pope and the way that the Roman Catholic Church was going. His character Declan Walsh becomes something of a reforming pope, trying to balance the Roman Catholic Church with the vicissitudes of the modern world. Our next book is The Assassini by Thomas Gifford from 1990. Thomas Gifford is our only non-Catholic author on this list, and Assassini is a conspiracy thriller set around the election of a new pope. Some of the action of this novel revolves around the behaviour of the Vatican Church and Pope Pius especially during the Second World War, and from what I can see, he certainly draws some people into particular criticism for corrupt practices, although he doesn't accuse the Catholic Church as a whole of being corrupt. But this is a conspiracy thriller, and people writing about it are often comparing it with the writings of Dan Brown, for good or ill. Our next book is White Smoke by Andrew M. Greeley from 1996. The novel follows a Chicago journalist who is looking into the life of an Irish-American cardinal called Sean Cronin, who might just be a candidate for the papacy. Andrew Greeley is a prolific novelist with over 50 novels to his name, and had a very established readership. And this was, by all accounts, a pretty good entry into his canon. Some critics of this book complained about the over-politicisation of the papal election process in the book, and others have complained about the romantic subplots getting in the way. The next book is Windswept House by Malachi Martin from 1996. This novel starts in 1963 with a satanic ritual being performed in the Vatican. We then switch forward to the mid-90s, where we have a dying pope and the fight to replace him. Is it going to be somebody representing the dark satanic forces of the New World Order and a corrupted Vatican? Or are a pair of American brothers, a priest and a journalist, going to be able to wrest the Catholic Church back from the brink, back to a more traditional time before Vatican II? This was a somewhat controversial book, with many people complaining of the sensationalism and, of course, the notion that the Vatican may have fallen to dark satanic forces. And Malachi Martin claimed that 85% of what he wrote was true, but we kind of only have his word for it. Malachi Martin was a former Jesuit priest who left the Jesuit order in a protest against the Vatican II reforms. He's continued to be a Catholic priest and wrote a lot of novels and thrillers about the Catholic Church. He did blot his copybook somewhat with his controversial views, his belief in really strange conspiracy theories, and of course his apocalyptic warnings about the future of the Roman Catholic Church. All the same, his fandom does seem to come mostly from people who adhere to a more traditionalist faction of the Roman Catholic Church. Our next book is Pope Patrick by Peter de Rosa from 1995. This is the tale of a mild-mannered country cardinal, an ordinary everyday Irish parson who gets swept up into the highest office in the Roman Catholic Church and turns it on his head with a little bit of help from his golden Labrador Charlie. This is very much a satirical book, and certainly on the side of saying that the Catholic Church needs to open up and reform and be a little bit nicer and kinder in the world. And Peter de Rosa himself was a Roman Catholic priest who left the priesthood in the 1970s. He wrote a number of non-fiction and fictional books about the Roman Catholic Church, and he also wrote books on Irish history. People have detected in this novel a kind of satirical version of Peter de Rosa's own journey from his Catholic faith through to leaving the priesthood. Our next book is Red Hat by Rolfe McInerny from 1998. You may know Rolfe McInerny from the Father Dowling Mysteries. This is a set of cosy mysteries set around the life of a Roman Catholic priest in America, in contemporary America. Red Hat is somewhat different to these. It concerns an American Roman Catholic priest who is appointed cardinal in the dying days of a pope's reign, and his appointment is not properly ratified. This leads to all kinds of shenanigans, including a schism taking an anti-pope back to Avignon. Rolfe McInerny was a writer from the conservative wing of the Roman Catholic Church. He was an academic and a Roman Catholic philosopher and a great follower of Thomas Aquinas. He was also critical of the reforms of Vatican II and formed an organisation called Crisis in Catholicism, which these days is known as Crisis. Some people claim that the organisation Crisis looks at the problems of Roman Catholicism and the potential schisms within Roman Catholicism, especially in America, from a very neoconservative standpoint. The next book is The Accidental Pope by Raymond Flynn and Robin Moore from the year 2000. The old Pope has died and the conclave is in deadlock. Then an American cardinal remembers a fisherman who used to be a Roman Catholic priest. By a set of chances, that man becomes the new Pope. He goes from being a fisherman to a fisher of men, if you like. Reviews of this book tend to talk about its respect for the traditions of church and the perhaps the importance of an openness to reform, although they do find that the idea of plucking a pope out of almost nowhere a little bit far-fetched. Raymond Flynn served as US ambassador to the Vatican in the 1990s, and people have seen in the book much of the expertise that he gained during that time. Robin Moore was a writer of thrillers, probably best known for his book The French Connection, which was made into a movie, and also The Green Berets, also made into a much less good movie. The last book of the 12 is The Death of a Pope by Piers from 2009. This book starts with the terrorism trial of a former Jesuit priest, a believer in liberation theology. It then moves on to a conclave, which is under threat by terrorists inspired by the former Jesuit priest. The threat is to kill conservative cardinals so that a very progressive pope will be elected. I don't know too much about liberation theology. I seem to recall that it's really about putting the poor and helping the poor as the number one objective of any Catholic priest, and that everything else is secondary. If you're not helping the poor, you're not helping. That's the general idea that I get from liberation theology, but I'm probably wrong. Piers is a British Roman Catholic author, probably best known for his book Alive, which is about a Uruguayan rugby team that crash land in the Andes and have to find ways of surviving, and ways that may be morally completely unacceptable. People talking about this book mention that Piers is something of a traditionalist when it comes to his religion, but also note that he is rather good at explaining things like liberation theology and gives his characters a lot of depth and a lot of motivation in what they're doing. So that's my list of 12 books on papal elections, which are not just Conclave. I hope it's a good mix of serious and not quite so serious, sensationalist and sensible, but things that look at all sides of the Roman Catholic Church and the potential schisms within that church. I have, of course, only done fictional works, novels. I haven't dealt with non-fiction. There are plenty of non-fiction books. Quite a lot of the authors I've mentioned wrote non-fiction about various conclaves, various elections of various popes. There are, of course, a number of non-fiction books about very controversial papal elections going back centuries, which are well worth reading. But I hope you've enjoyed this selection. Goodbye.